Hey, YouTube. How is it going? I hope all is well. We're going to talk very shortly here about some wire. I've been hit up a couple times about it. I have a small segment in one of my build series about it. We'll just touch on it real quick here. There's really not much to it. It's more or less, there's only three major considerations you have to make for it. First and foremost, the aesthetic. Do you like this glossy Teflon coated stuff? Do you like PVC coated stuff? Or do you like cloth covered stuff? Make that choice right now. Beyond that, it doesn't matter. Second thing that you need to be considerate of is the rating of that wire. This is 600 volt, 106 centigrade rated wire. That means that this wire is rated for 600 volts at 106 degrees centigrade. Pretty freaking hot, really. So this stuff's not horrible, but so this is very similar. These are both 22 gauge, and you can see that they both have like this white center in there, right? So that white center is the PVC that's on both of these. This is kind of faux cloth covered wire, if you will. So it just has a cloth covering over the jacket that's just like this in the center. They're both 22 gauge, and the only difference is this one has the coating on there, the cloth. It's not the pushback style or anything like that. But obviously this stuff here is rated for 600 volts and at least 106C, right? So we know that. Most real cloth covered wire, that stuff isn't actually rated. A lot of it's not rated for 600C. So, or 600 volts. So be mindful of that. Use what's rated for the amplifier. And the third and final rating that you need to worry about for your wire is the actual amperage. And that's where the gauge kind of comes in, the gauge of the wire that you use. So there's three predominant gauges that are used in most guitar amplifiers. 22 gauge, which is this thinner stuff here, and this stuff here, it's 22. 22 gauge, 20 gauge, and 18 gauge. Now, excuse me, goodness, sorry. Here, this is an ASMR. This is what's my problem right now. So, what is the difference, and why does it matter? Well, in most of the amplifier build, and when I say most of the amplifier build, I mean in the majority of the amplifier itself, 22 gauge is superfluous for what you're going to be doing. So all the wires that come off the plates and go to the, the tone pots or the volume pots, or, run off to the, the phase inverter, or all the signal wire, right? All the wires that come to ground. So the wires that go from cathode to ground or something like that, all of those wires there, this 22 gauge wire is going to be superfluous for. No problem whatsoever. The only place where you're going to find that there's an issue with the gauge of wire that you use is going to be in the heater supply. So going back a little bit, I mentioned that there's three major sizes. There's 22, there's 20, and there's 18. Most guitar amplifiers are built with 22 and or 18. I'd say 20 gauge is kind of like the three bears, right? One's too much, one's too little, and the one's just right. It doesn't work that way in this regard. For some reason, 20 gauge is not as popular as 18 or 22. And the reason being is that most amps, especially nowadays since we've gotten into the lunchbox craze, is that most amplifiers can work in their entirety with 22 gauge wire. Whereas when you start getting into some of the deluxe reverbs, or your 120 watt or 100 watt monsters, like an SLO 100 or something like that, right? An SLO has 4 6L6s in it. I think they make a version of it now that has EL34s, especially in that model, that version. And then of course they've got 5, and some now. Well, there's some different models out there, of course, that have like 6 preamp tubes in them. It's getting ridiculous. But in an amp like that, where you've got 4 power tubes and like 5, preamp tubes, 4 power tubes and 5 preamp tubes, you're definitely going to want to go with 18 gauge for the heater circuit. So the heater circuit is this, the circuit in your amp that's actually drawing the most current, okay? It's low voltage, but it has a lot of current going through it. I want to say an EL34, a single one, has something like 3 amps of current draw for the heater, something like that. Maybe not quite that much. I might be... check your data sheets. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's significant. Maybe it's 1 watt or 1 amp, excuse me, or something like that. But, whereas a 12AX7 is standard, preamp tube, maybe half a watt or something like that. Whatever it might be, it's not that high comparatively to the power section of the amplifier. In most amplifiers, you could probably get away with 18 gauge in just the power tube section, and then you could switch to 22 gauge for the rest of the amplifier. Sans, again, amplifiers that have a lot of preamp tubes in them, like a Deluxe Reverb or some of those other amps that have literally 6 preamp tubes in them. Then you might want to stay away from the 22 gauge and stick to the 18 gauge. You could even get away with 20 gauge, but it seems like these are the 2 most common, right? I don't know why. The one in the middle just doesn't always win. Now, I say that only for the heater circuit. Again, as I mentioned, the 22 gauge will work for everything else in the amplifier, no problem. Because everywhere else in the amplifier, yes, it is higher voltage, but the trade-off is that it's, because of that higher voltage, it's also much lower amperage. We're talking milliamps worth of amperage in reality. I think like a 12AX7, like blasting full bore is what, 1 milliamp, 2 milliamps. It's small. Even if it was 100 milliamps, it's 1 watt. Like, it's nothing. So again, that's the only other real consideration that you need to think about is the heater circuit. So between all that, what else makes these different? What else kind of differentiates the different ones? So there's, I guess, 4 major types of wire. You've got just stranded PVC coated. You've got stranded Teflon coated. You've got pre-tinned stranded Teflon coated. And then you've got solid core. All right, 4. So solid core. We'll start at the solid core. What's great about solid core is it definitely has a slightly higher amperage rating than any of the stranded variants. Again, not a big deal if you work your amp within the limitations, right? Heater circuit being the only major important one. But solid core wire doesn't do well when you bend it back and forth too often. When you bend it back and forth a lot, it's prone to breaking. And it's very hard to tell if it broke in the middle somewhere. Really kind of a pain in the butt. I don't like solid core because of that reason. Also, it's kind of a bitch to work with when you're in tight zones or tight spaces and you've got to get it to fit just the right way. And then once you put it there and solder it all in, like, there is no going back. There's no fixing it. You can't readjust it after that. You pretty much got to get it right, and you got to get it right the first time. That's one reason I also don't like this stuff. And then, of course, as you try to adjust it more and more to make it work the way you want, you stand that chance of breaking it, and once it's broken, you're redoing all that work again. So I don't like solid core wire. We'll get that one out of the way. Now, solid core cloth covered stuff, it's the same problem. Doesn't matter. I like this stuff here. This stuff is the pre-tinned stranded Teflon coated wire. Now, the only other difference between these 3 here is the coating on them, right? So PVC is prone to melting at lower temperatures. So when you put if you're doing an amp with a turret board, right, you put this thing on there and you go to heat it up to get it to solder on, it's more likely to burn back and melt back and shrivel up and look ugly at the joint. This is the next best thing. The coated, the cloth coated stuff. Obviously, it doesn't really burn the same way, so it doesn't look like it got burned when you solder it on there. So it looks a little more aesthetic, at least in that regard. But then there's the Teflon coated stuff. The Teflon coated wire it doesn't burn, so it looks really, really nice no matter what you do to it. So there's that. Now, the pre-tinned Teflon coated wire acts a lot like solid core wire. When you bend solid core wire, it holds the shape. Well, same with this stuff here, this pre-tinned Teflon coated stuff, right? So it kind of holds its shape. Whereas, and I don't have any, I'm sorry, because I hate it so much, I don't keep any of it around, but the regular PVC stranded wire, the 4th variant that we're talking about, it doesn't really hold its shape. So it's difficult to make it look a certain way, to make, those nice tight bends and all that stuff. And then it's covered with the PVC coating, which is prone to melting away anyway. So it not only looks not as aesthetic, but it's also just as much of a pain in the butt to work with, because it's really difficult to make it go where you want it to go. One of the workarounds is to use, like a little bit of heat gun action, so enough to make it just a little bit soft, to make the jacket a little bit softer, and then you get it all, wound up where you need it to go, and then you kind of get it to hold that shape. Once you get it kind of in place, you can use the heat gun again to kind of, again, get it soft and do any finishing touches, and then once it cools off, it kind of holds that shape indefinitely, right? Whatever. The only other variant of the Teflon coated stuff is the non-pre-tinned. So you can get this stuff pre-tinned or non-pre-tinned. Now, the non-pre-tinned version of it is a lot like the PVC stranded wire. It doesn't really hold its shape as well. And then, of course, now you've got this very stiff Teflon coating. This stuff is not easy to get off. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt. So why I don't like the non-pre-tinned version is that it is more prone to problems. Unlike all the rest of them, when you go to try to strip it and move it around, it doesn't have the best of both worlds, I guess, if you want to put it like that. The only thing that's nice about Teflon coated wire, a la normal stranded, is that it doesn't burn, right? So that is why I like the I'm just not going to get it right today. Sorry. The pre-tinned stranded Teflon coated stuff is what I like. Okay. And only for that reason alone. It acts like solid core. Because it's already pre-tinned, it's not as prone to yanking away and getting ugly when you take off the jacket, because this jacket is very thick. It's kind of a pain in the butt to get off. But once you get it off, it stays together nicely. It's easier to get it in the thing, and you don't have to pre-tin it to put it in the hole that you need to solder in. So once you pull off the jacket, you can put it in the thing, run your solder up to it, and it's already in the spot that you need it to be. You're done. So there's that. I only keep 22 gauge and 18 gauge around because 20 gauge just doesn't seem to hit the mark. If 22 gauge isn't going to work, it's generally only not going to work because it's in the heater circuit. And if it's not going to work in the heater circuit, it's because it's far below the safe margin, which means by that point in time, you might as well just go big or go home. So 18 gauge for the win on that. 18 gauge will pretty much handle anything that you can throw at it in terms of what a heater circuit in an amplifier is willing or able to create. So there's that. So which wire that do you want to use? Totally up to you. Sonically, there is no difference between these. I can make the same amp 3 different ways, 4 different ways. It's going to sound the same. All of them are going to sound the same-ish. I mean, there's obviously the sum of all parts, but, all else being the same, that the reason it sounds different, it would not be because of the wire. We'll call it hysteresis, right? Part hysteresis. That my attitude changes tomorrow. Actually, it just changed 5 minutes ago, but whatever. So pick a wire for whatever reason you want and go with it. Just make the only major consideration that I say you need to think about is the heater circuit and whether or not you can get away with 22 gauge or 18 gauge, and whether or not you want to go with 18 gauge in the whole of the amp or just in the heater circuit and then go with 22 gauge on the rest. That's up to you. Obviously, the more options you have, the more it's going to cost to build an amp. I usually only carry 3 colors, I'm sorry. Red, black, and I didn't bring the white over because it's the same as this stuff here, but I only use red, black, and white. Those are my colors, and it keeps it simple. For me, I use anything in the signal side of things that is not going to ground is white. Anything that's touching ground, I'll use black. And then, of course, with the heater circuit, I just use red and black so that I know which one, which heater wire I've got going to what socket on the tube. That's it. So thank you so much for sticking around with me. If you like what you're seeing and you want some more of it, and you just hit like and subscribe, whatever, you know what I mean. All of that blah, 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 bull crap. Thank you so much. We'll see you on the next one.